Good afternoon or late good morning. It's after 11:30 a little bit, so I want to get started. My name is Jane Yokoyama. I am the co-chair of the General Topics Fab Friday Committee. And first, I want to thank you all for coming, both those of you here and those of you online, and also wish you a happy Valentine's Day. We do have some Fab Friday committee members here, and I'd like to recognize them. So Susan Kaiser, she will be sharing a microphone, passing around a microphone at the end of the presentation for those of you who have questions. Anne Marie Clancy's here, and I see Martha Marshall, and I don't see the other ones. They may be caught up in traffic or have other commitments. But what I want you to do is, if you have any suggestions for Fab Friday topics, you can either approach one of us. There's also on our website a place where you can write in any suggestions, or if you want to do a program yourself, then you can also submit a proposal. Now, I want to remind you that next week we have a talk at Fab Friday with Inflammation and Lifestyle Medicine by Dr. Brian Aspel, and that's the last Fab Friday of this term. And then starting in March, on March 28th, is Alan Muskrak on foraging, and I will be the host for that. What we would like to do is, if you have any questions about the presentation for Anna, go ahead and save them to the end of it and wait for one of us to give you the microphone so people who are online can also hear your great questions. All right, today it's my pleasure to introduce Anna Alsobrook, who will be speaking on the impact of micro and nanoplastics in humans and on our planet. And I know I have read recently several articles about how they affect us, and they actually can find some in our brains as well. So a little bit about Ms. Alsobrook. She grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and received her Bachelor of Science in Global Studies and a Master's in Geography with a concentration in watershed from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. She has been living here in Asheville since 2014. She's working for Mountain True, and her current title is French Broad River Keeper. She also is the coordinator for a group called Plastic Free WNC, and I know she does a fabulous job there. She's passionate about caring for our environment and educating others, and I appreciate that. And in her spare time, she loves spending time outdoors here in North Carolina. So with that, please make sure you silence your devices and keep your drinks covered, and I'll turn it over to Anna. Thank you, Anna.
Can y'all hear me? Cool. Thank you, Jane. Thank you all the folks for having me today. I am passionate about plastics. It's just one little piece of what I do at Mountain True, but it's become like such a passion project for me. I never get this amount of time to educate people about plastics, so I am pumped to be here with y'all today, and we can just really nerd out about microplastics in and around us. So before I really get started, I'm gonna pass this clipboard around. If you're interested in Mountain True and any of the other things we do, feel free to sign up. You'll get an email and all the up-to-date things that we're doing. So I'll pass this around if you want to. So one thing I do want to note is the Plastic Free WNC Coalition that Jane mentioned just now is made up of not just Mountain True, but it's members of Sierra Club, NRDC, Environment Action Committee, and Southern Environmental Law Center, as well as just like general people. So if you have an interest in what we talk about today and you want to put some boots on the ground, feel free to contact me after the presentation, and we can talk about how you can be involved. So just a general overview of what I'll talk about today. We'll start very briefly with what Mountain True does, what French Broad Riverkeeper does, talk a little bit about what watersheds are, And I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir with this information, but some people just don't know. We'll talk about why plastics is even an issue, what makes it complicated, and then we'll talk about what we're seeing in the French Broad watershed specifically and what next steps are. Is this too loud, or should I stand back? Are y'all, is good? Okay. Okay, so Mountain True, we're an environmental nonprofit. We've been based in Western North Carolina for over 40 years. We were founded on doing advocacy work. So it started 40 plus years ago when people wanted to oppose some logging that was happening on public lands. And they fought the Forest Service about this particular logging project and won. And so from there, it's evolved to what we are today. We're still an advocacy organization, but we do a lot of boots on the ground, kind of restoration work. I work in our water programming, so we have several river keepers on staff, and we focus across all of Western North Carolina. We also have folks who still do logging and forest planning and that public lands work. We also have people focused on clean energy and transportation, as well as healthy communities, affordable housing, and things like that. So that's Mountain True in a nutshell. What does the French Broad Riverkeeper do? So we're specific to the French Broad watershed. Our whole purpose is to make the rivers and waters in the watershed better, more swimmable, more fishable. So what does that mean? We basically go out and look for points of pollution and work to get those fixed. Sometimes that's going to take water quality samples. Ken Brames here, he's also a founding member of Plastic Free WNC. He could probably give this presentation for me. So I'll do a good job. But anyway, so we go out, take water samples, and then we hold polluters accountable. So sometimes that means we, work with state agencies to get an industry back up and running in a way that's more sustainable for the environment. Sometimes that means we're in Raleigh lobbying for better policies environmentally, and sometimes that means we take people to court if they're not acting correctly. So it's a lot of different ways we tackle pollution in the French Broad, and sometimes it's just doing river cleanups, or we've got a bunch of campsites, getting people connected to the river. So we have our hands in a lot of different avenues in terms of protecting the French Broad. So very, very quickly, what is a watershed? So we probably all drive over rivers probably like 20 times a day, I think, around here. And I remember before I got into this work, never really caring or thinking about what was under that bridge that I was driving over. Well, those are all connected. A watershed is basically an area of land where any of the rain or precipitation that falls on that land funnels to kind of a central point. And ours is dictated by the topography of the area. So our mountains kind of funnel the rain down towards the nearest creek or stream, follows gravity, and then that'll all funnel to the French Broad watershed. And the French Broad is pretty big watershed. It's over 8 counties. One thing to note, watersheds do not follow political boundaries. So it would be really ideal if they did, because it'd make my job a lot easier in terms of talking to political officials, but that's not how we've divided things up. So for our purposes, we work basically within an hour and a half in any direction of Asheville, sometimes more. So down in Rosman, all the way up to Knoxville. We include the Nolichucky River, so going up to, and then the tributaries of that, so the Irwin, Spruce Pine, Burnsville, even the Pigeon River, so we go out west to Hartford, Tennessee. It's really quite a big area. Specifically to the French Broad, it flows north and west, so a lot of people, that's kind of counterintuitive, because when you picture a river, you think it flows down or flows south, but for us, the French Broad flows north. So Rosman is the headwaters of the French Broad. It's an hour south of us. So when I say upstream, I'm talking about south. If I'm saying downstream, I'm talking about north. So just kind of a frame of reference. It's one of the oldest rivers in the world. The Cherokee used to have canoe races on the river and called it Takiasti. And then one kind of interesting anecdote that I like to share with people. So we have the French Broad here in Asheville, right? The Broad River is just on the other side of the Continental Divide. In the Continental Divide, any water that flows on the east side of the Continental Divide will end up in the Atlantic Ocean. Anything on the west side of the Continental Divide will end up in the Gulf of Mexico. And notice I said Gulf of Mexico. Somebody made me like ask me, I don't know, it's a thing. So anyway, the Broad. Okay, so the difference between the French Broad and the Broad rivers, right? So back in the early days, the colonizers distinguished between those two watersheds. The Broad River was a big broad river that flowed into British territory, and what makes the French Broad French is that it's a big broad river that flowed into French territory. So that's the only difference. And they go in different directions, so. All right, so here's just like a quick table of contents of some of the topics about plastics specifically that we'll cover today. My boss and I started thinking about plastics, I don't know, like 6 years ago, Ken, 6 or 7. And we started looking at it kind of from a trash perspective. We do, 100 river cleanups a year, and it just got to the point where it felt like we weren't making a difference. We just kept pulling stuff out of the river time over time, and the thing we pull out the most is single-use plastics. So we started questioning that. Why all this stuff in the river? Where is it coming from? And what can we do to keep it out of the river? And that's when we found out that it's a much more complicated issue. So plastics are specifically tied to climate. They're obviously a trash issue. We'll talk a little bit about their impacts to the Buncombe County landfill. They're an equity issue, as well as Jane mentioned earlier, a health issue. And the health piece, I think, is really important for us to make systemic change. So most people don't realize this, but most plastics are made from the fossil fuel industry. I think it's like 99%. I forgot I put that on there. Okay, 99% of plastics come from oil and gas, and it comes from a byproduct of the hydrofracking process. So as we've seen, since hydrofracking has gone up, natural gas prices have gone down, the cost of making plastic has also gone down. And what that has done is really shifted the amount of plastic production we see in the market. What we're seeing oil and gas companies do, as we as a society have decided to move towards more sustainable versions of energy and energy consumption, like solar, wind, EV cars, that kind of a thing. The oil and gas industry is really pumping a lot of energy into plastic production. It's their lifeline, basically. It's their plan B. That's been the case for the last, I think, couple of decades. I'm a little curious to see how AI fits into the mix. That might throw the equation a little bit. But for now, plastic production is how the oil and gas industry intends to survive as we move towards more sustainability. What I have here on this graph is the top chart. Oh, sorry for the Zoom people up here. I don't know if y'all can see the typing, but this far left column is plastic production. This is BP oil demand growth for the next 20 years. And you can see plastic far outpaces all other sectors in that market, including cars, including trucks, including power. So plastics is really going to be what they end up leaning on to keep forward. Just some quick facts. Every year, plastic production adds as much greenhouse gases as 116 coal-fired power plants. And if plastics were a country, it'd be the 5th highest emitter of greenhouse gases. So obviously, it's really tied to climate. Now, I want to make a particular comment here for y'all to keep in mind. So plastics obviously are very convenient, and I don't know that we can get rid of plastics. What I want you to take home today is there's this whole category of plastics that we can get rid of. They're called single-use plastics. They make up 40% of plastic production. So all of our plastic facilities, 40% of what they're making is single-use plastics. And these are items that are used for maybe 12 minutes before we throw them away. Oh wait, I might have a, oh yeah. So yeah, think like cutlery, shopping bags, straws, takeout containers, that kind of a thing. 40% of what plastics are manufactured are stuff for disposal, immediate disposal. So I mentioned that story about why we started looking into plastics as an issue. Research has shown that, despite our best efforts, we as consumers, about a third of our plastic waste ends up in the environment. So it is a trash issue. It is a litter issue. In fact, DOT, our region of DOT, Region 13, which is just specific to Western North Carolina counties, spent almost $2 million in 2021 just getting trash out of the right-of-way. And when I say trash, it's pretty synonymous with single-use plastics, typically. It's still the most pervasive thing we pull out of the river during river cleanups and also when we do road-based cleanups. And one of the reasons for this, I think, is because the nature of plastics themselves. Plastics can be light, they're airy, they're flimsy, they can get caught in trees, they can get caught in storm drains. They're very easily mobile. And for that reason, once they get out of the captured waste system, they can easily move around in the environment. So we've all probably seen it, especially after the hurricane, right? Trees were just covered in plastic films, still are in places. All of that just stays there. Plastics don't ever biodegrade, and I'll go into that in a minute. But yeah, so plastics are just in the environment. They'll end up in the waterways eventually, and the French Broad eventually goes to the Gulf of Mexico. So we're feeding everything into the oceans. A study was done in 2019 that predicted by 2025, which is this year, there'll be 1 pound of plastic for every 3 pounds of fish in the ocean. By 2050, that number reverses. So 3 pounds of plastic for every 1 pound of fish in the ocean. And that's as status quo. One thing I forgot to mention in the climate slide is that the pace of plastic production is gearing up. They've put a lot of money into new manufacturing plants, and it's not slowing down unless there's policy changes. Okay, so really quickly, I want to iterate. People often ask me, well, why don't we just recycle plastics? It doesn't really work that well, to be honest with you. It's complicated. Let me start there. There are different types of plastics. So we're all very familiar with the little triangle thing at the bottom of the item, and it has a number inside of it. We've been kind of conditioned to think that means it's recyclable. Well, that's not the case. The number inside that triangle indicates the type of resin that plastic item was made out of, not its recyclability. So when you look at those numbers going forward, what we can do here domestically are just ones and twos. And even more restrictive than that, it's basically just bottles and jugs. Our facility here, Kirby, can also take fives, which are usually your yogurt containers or dairy sour cream containers. But those are really the only 3 things we can put in the recycling bin. A lot of people want to wish cycle, and that's just throwing anything in the recycling bin thinking it's going to end up recycled. What that ends up doing is kind of clogging the whole recycling process, which I'll show you with this video in a minute. But if you think of all the types of plastic we have. We have PVC pipes, we have Ziploc bags, we have shower curtains. Those are all plastic. Sometimes they're multi-layers of plastic, like chip bags are a good example. They're different layers, which makes recycling them really difficult and costly, and there's not really a market at the end of it. So plastics recycling is not really gonna get us to where we need to be in terms of cutting out plastic cutting out plastic pollution. One thing I do wanna note is that recycling rates for aluminum and cardboard are really high. So it's not recycling, recycling is not the issue, it's the fact that plastic is really complicated. A couple other things I'll say before I start this short film we made with Nancy Lawson. I mentioned, you know, a lot of our plastic waste ends up in the environment, about 1/3. When an item does make it to the recycling facility, it is only effectively recycled 2% of the time. And what that means is the majority of the time, it is what's called downcycled. So, you know, you think you have a plastic water bottle, you recycle it, you think it turns into another plastic water bottle. That's not always what happens, and that's mostly not what happens. A plastic water bottle, when it goes through the recycling process, it becomes it becomes more fragile, so it has to become a lesser quality material. So typically what happens is a water bottle might get turned into carpet, or it might get turned into textiles like our clothes. It very rarely does a water bottle turn from a water bottle back into a water bottle. Does that make sense? Okay. So what that does is we can recycle an item 1 to maybe 2 times before it reaches a form where we can't recycle it anymore. Okay, so let me share this video with y'all really fast. This is at Kirby, which is our local recycling facility. Nancy Lawson was one of the owners. I think they just sold recently, but they're very supportive of this. I love showing this video. When we made it with her, you can't tell, but there's like a rat walking all over her feet. So keep in mind how cool she is as we play this.
So this is all of the waste, and you can see that the majority of it is bags, right?
Hi, I'm Nancy Lawson. My husband Barry and I are the owners and operators of Curbside Management, and here we are at our material recovery facility. The majority of what we get that we cannot accept is plastic bags. People should not put plastic shopping bags in their recyclables. We have about 18 to 20 workers that are sorting and separating our recyclables and picking out and making individual products. 60 or 70% of what our workers do here is actually removing plastic bags out of our system. Our landfill costs for just getting rid of the plastic bags alone is somewhere around $10,000 or more a month. An ordinance or a plastic bag, shopping bag ban would go a long way in helping us recycle more efficiently.
Can you believe that? $10,000 a month just in landfill tipping cost, and that's just for plastic bags. So we made this video a few years ago because we were pushing really hard to do a plastic bag ban here in Buncombe County in the city of Asheville, which we can talk about later. But yeah, that's a lot of money, right? And a lot of space in the landfill. So one thing to note is this is a kind of a complicated looking set of graphs, but Buncombe County did a waste audit in 2022. These are the results from the residential waste stream. And the biggest thing we put in our waste is actually organics, stuff that can be composted. So that's a pretty cool thing that we can fix, and if we want to save landfill space. Buncombe County and the city of Asheville have already started that. You can take your compost to specific locations and drop it off. So that's a really cool, step of progress in that regard. But plastic, and especially plastic films, is right next to that, right under food waste. So it's about 10% of what we're throwing in the landfill. That's a lot of space in a landfill that has a finite lifespan. Land here in Buncombe County is expensive. So when our landfill fills up, where's it gonna go? I don't know. We don't need to know that right now, but it's something we should have in the back of our minds. Okay, so plastics is also an equity issue, and for two reasons. The first is most plastic manufacturing facilities are in communities, low-income communities and communities of color. This particular photo is taken from St. James Parish in Louisiana, in an area also known as Cancer Alley. The rates of cancer in this community are exponentially higher than anywhere else in the country. The reason for that is because they are inundated with plastic manufacturing and petrochemical companies. So they're bringing in the toxins that all of those industries are releasing. They're drinking water that can come into contact with those facilities as well. So typically speaking, these are the types of areas where plastic manufacturing takes place. It's also an equity issue based on where plastics end up at the end of their life, is what we call it. So, we do oftentimes they end up in the trash or in the landfill, but a lot of times, especially in the last few years, all that wish cycling, stuff that doesn't end up in the landfill that can't be recycled, we would ship overseas to countries who don't have the infrastructure to deal with it. So it was China, but in 2018 they closed their doors to us for what was recycling. And since then we've moved to other places who haven't closed their doors to us, and basically we're shipping them waste product. They don't necessarily have the infrastructure to deal with it there either, so it becomes a waste product for them. Okay, so here's this scary part. And I should have prefaced that as a good environmentalist, I'm going to give you a lot of doom and gloom. This whole presentation is like 98% gloom, but we'll have a little sliver at the end where you can have some hope. Okay, so I mentioned a little bit earlier, plastics are not biodegradable. Degradable and biodegradable are not the same thing. Plastics do degrade, and what happens with them, especially when they're in the environment and exposed to sunlight and water, wind, they are kind of brittle, so they will break down and break down and break down till you cannot see them anymore, at which point we call them microplastics. When you get even smaller, we have nanoplastics. So two things you cannot see with your naked eye, but still are plastic products. They are I would argue they are the most pervasive thing on the planet. So we have seen plastic or microplastics and nanoplastics. We found them at the top of Everest, but if you think about that, people hike up there, they have gear, that gear sheds. But we have found them at the bottom of the Marianas Trench in the ocean. We have found them in the most remote, uninhabited islands in the Pacific Ocean. So you have to wonder, this has got to be bad if we're finding it in all of these places. And the more plastic we produce, the more microplastics and nanoplastics there will be. So kind of just keep that in the back of your minds. One thing I will say is, and I just learned this recently, as our technology gets better, as we're able to see smaller and smaller sized plastic particles, we're seeing more of them. So, we can see microplastics with a microscope. Nanoplastics, you need more technology like spectrometers and pretty intense lab equipment. We don't have that at Mountain True. We just look at microplastics. But what we're seeing is as you kind of dumb down the size, we're seeing more of those particles. And a couple of reasons why they are concerning. Plastics are typically not purely just plastic. They are often laden with chemicals. So we mentioned earlier, all the characteristics of plastics that make them convenient. PVC pipes are really hard. Shower curtains are really soft and flimsy. The reason they're both plastic, but they're so different in qualities, are the chemicals that get put into them. So some of those chemicals are pretty concerning, and they readily leach out into their surrounding environments. Okay, I thought I had a slide about that, but I couldn't remember. So Jane mentioned this earlier. We're seeing microplastics and nanoplastics in the human body. There's a lot of literature out there right now. There's a lot of people studying this topic right now because it is concerning. Every outcome of every study I've read has been concerning. We're seeing linkages from microplastics to Parkinson's, to obesity, diabetes, respiratory issues, reproductive system issues, other neurological things. There's a whole slew of stuff where we're seeing linkages between the presence of microplastics and the chemicals that are in them, and then some pretty harmful health impacts. What I will say is I would like maybe the first few years of looking into this, the health impacts seem to be more geared towards the chemicals that were in the plastics and their interactions to what was in our bodies. And now there's been kind of a shift, or maybe it's just more studies are being published about the health impacts of just the actual microplastics themselves. So we're starting to see it from both sides. And I think this piece of the puzzle will be pretty crucial for us to make systemic change in terms of plastic pollution. The more people who realize how harmful the health impacts are because of microplastics, the more likely we'll be able to push for less plastic production, which is what we need. Oh, and then more scary tidbits. Jane mentioned this. Yes, we have found microplastics in the brain. We have found them in deep lung tissue. We have found them in the placenta on both the mother's side and the fetal side. So I am no longer surprised. At first I was surprised. I'm like, how could a microplastic be in the placenta? Now there's been so many studies where it just is like, okay, yeah, I figured that they were there. So now the question is, what are they doing to us, and what can we do about it? So going back to the chemical impacts of the microplastics in our bodies, there's a couple of classes of chemicals that are in a lot of our single-use plastics that can easily come into our bodies. One class of chemicals is phthalates. They're known endocrine disruptors, which means they kind of mess with our hormones. Presence of them in the human body has shown sperm decline, almost 50%. And so that's pretty drastic, I think, over a few generations. What they're seeing is not only less sperm, but they're seeing less quality sperm. So after a few generations, what does that look like? They also, another class or another type of chemical that we see in plastics is styrene. That's a known carcinogen. It's oftentimes in it is in takeout containers, typically styrofoam takeout containers. It easily leaches out into hot, fatty foods. What do you typically have in a takeout container? Hot and fatty food. So these are things that are coming into us just by the nature of us being human consumers. So we've been looking at microplastics in the French Broad for 4 years, I think now. And we've been trying to get a baseline, like what's in there, how much do we have, is it worrisome, that kind of a thing. There's no threshold, there's no standard, there's no like regulatory number that we can base these values to. So the actual number, I wouldn't spend too much time thinking about, but what I would alert you to is that since 2021, this is only 2021 to 2023, the number of microplastics we've seen per sample has doubled. I didn't put 2024 numbers in because I haven't yet processed any post-Helene samples, and I'm anticipating a pretty big spike after Helene hit. Okay, so that was a lot of doom. What do we do next? Okay, we firmly believe at Plastic Free WNC / Mountain True that we just need less plastic. We need to produce less plastic. That is the answer. The way we do that is through education, is through policy changes, and we need policy changes at every level of government. I mentioned earlier we tried to push a plastic bag ban and styrofoam takeout container ban here in Buncombe County and the city of Asheville. We got very close. We got extremely close. And then behind closed doors, the General Assembly in Raleigh made a rule that said local governments cannot ban single-use plastic or cannot regulate single-use plastics. So they essentially tied our hands behind our back. We, as Buncombe County citizens, City of Asheville citizens, who have a landfill where a majority of it is plastic, we don't have a lot of space to put another landfill. We can't do anything that to regulate single-use plastics at this point in time. We are still fighting for that in different ways, but legally speaking, we don't have the power to do that as a local government. So what do we need? We need statewide advocacy. Anyone here is welcome to do this, contacting your state representatives and state senators and telling them that this is an important thing to you, you want to see changes on this. I will say our delegation here in in Buncombe County and City of Asheville has been supportive of this. Senator Julie Mayfield, all the representatives, they have all been supportive of this. Where we need real education is if you have family or friends or anyone who lives in other parts of the state who have passion for this, to contact their state representatives and senators and tell them this is something important. We did a statewide poll last year. It showed 88% of North Carolinians want regulation on single-use plastic. But the General Assembly kind of disregarded that. They decided they'd put business interest first instead of North Carolinians' health, instead of our environment. And yeah, so we need change at the state level. We also, we can all do a little bit better in our personal lives in terms of plastic consumption. I had, I was thinking about that this morning, like, oh, I love crackers so much. It's like one of my favorite foods, but you can't get crackers without plastic around them. So yeah, maybe I start making crackers. I don't know, that sounds kind of like a pain, but just like thinking through your day-to-day, what can you do to eliminate some kind of single-use plastic somewhere? We do have a couple cool stores here where you can bring your own bottles to refill, like shampoo, conditioner, house cleaning products, that kind of a thing. And then, as always, outreach and education, I think, is really important for these kinds of topics, because the more people who know about it, the more people that care about it, the more, people that might be active about it and contacting their state representatives and senators to try to get more regulatory changes. And I think there's also kind of a unique opportunity for people who are like entrepreneurial types to create more of these reuse, refill systems, because there is no like one silver bullet that's gonna cure plastic pollution. We need yes and situations, yes and scenarios. Yes, we need regulatory change. Yes, we need individual consumption patterns to change. Yes, we need like new types of businesses that focus on less waste, that kind of a thing. Okay, so that's it. I'm scared to ask for questions, but there's someone in the back.
In the UK, I don't think we've banned plastic bags, shopping bags, but behind other countries, we've introduced a charge. So if you want a plastic bag when you're shopping, you can have one, but it'll cost you 10, 20 pence. You know, in dollar terms, it's just a few cents. But there's been a radical reduction in the use of plastic bags. Now, I heard you say, oh, you can't ban the use without legislation, but I was just wondering about canvassing local businesses and saying, would you consider introducing a charge? And maybe Asheville and other towns around would be able to say, we are actively engaged in reducing single-use plastic bags, whether that would be something that was easier to implement.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so voluntarily we can go to businesses and ask them to put a charge on bags, whether it's paper or plastic. And we're starting to do that kind of work. That being said, we were pushing for a ban here in Buncombe County in the city of Asheville. We have colleagues in Durham that were pushing for a bag fee. And both options are good. I think both options result in less plastic in the environment, but we can no longer do either legally in North Carolina because the General Assembly took that power away from us. So the only way for that to be undone is if we have a state law that allows it to be done. So that's why we need a lot of statewide advocacy. But yes, we can go to individual businesses and say, hey, this is important. Would you consider changing your policies around plastic bags, or would you consider charging for plastic bags?
Thanks for this wonderful presentation. So shopping at Ingles, I'm always outraged as standing in line and watching the baggers put 12 plastic bags around carrots and other things rather than people bringing their own bags in. And I understand an article in the Watchdog, the local Asheville Watchdog, kind of highlighted some pressure was put on Ingles to rectify this situation regarding plastic bags. Can you speak to, how that played out and where we are now?
Great question. I forgot we did this. So we went to Ingles and it was me and a coworker, and we got the exact same items. This is the Watchdog article you're referring to, I think. We got the exact same items, the exact same amount of items. I went through one line and asked for a paper bag. He went through another line and didn't say anything, so they obviously default to plastic. My entire order came in one paper bag. Kareem's order came in like 12 plastic bags. So, we did this to highlight the discrepancy in carrying capacity. Paper bags obviously hold more, so you need less of them. And plastic bags, just the nature of how they pack it or how they pack your groceries, they don't care, really. They just want to get you out the door as fast as possible. So they just throw, one thing in a bag or sometimes two things in a bag, just, really fast. I can't say it's rectified anything in Ingles' system of how they do things. I do think it raised a lot of awareness with our public officials. We had hesitancy from some business owners when we were talking about doing a bag ban, because they kind of anticipated, well, then everybody's just going to start using paper bags. Paper bags are more expensive. You know, like, we don't want that extra cost. And so we did this experiment to show them, well, you know, maybe they're more expensive, but you'll have to use less of them. So it was an interesting experiment. I don't think it changed anything at Ingalls.
Yeah, how about a bit of good news? I understand that the European Union now regulates microplastics, at least those microplastics that are added to products, like things like cosmetics. And these regulations are being phased in, so that's good. I don't anticipate much happening on the federal level here in the next couple of years, but it's good to see something's happening at the state level.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, yeah. Just a thought. If you combined the British strategy that was offered to us a moment ago, which I've witnessed, my daughter's a Brit, is very effective. But if you also pick up on the theme of repair of post-Helena area here, there's a lot of enthusiasm in the community, both in the commercial side as well as the nonprofit side, to raise money and earmark it for things that have to do with repair of the environment, of people's conditions who suffered through the hurricane and so forth. So if you had crafted a program that, instead of having a negative flavor to it, instead was an opportunity for local businesses to raise money through the charge of a fee for bags, and then with the idea that this would be put aside for feeding into a fund that was reparative in the community, whether it's ecological damage or whether it's human, damage from the hurricane and so forth. I think that might be a more saleable avenue to pursue. Businesses are already used to doing things around fundraising where there'll be a given month where they'll charge, upcharge or round off your bill, for example, with the understanding that that money is going to go to, say, Beloved or something like that. And so that's not a foreign concept in the community. And if you package or tie those two things together, you might have a way of making that a more acceptable concept.
I love that. Sounds like you need to join Plastic Free WNC. We have meetings once a month. We'll see you there.
I have a more health-based question. You buy a bottle of water. Are there microplastics in that already, or does it take a while for the plastic to break down?
I don't know the exact time frame, but yes, there are microplastics in bottled water. Studies have shown that, just looked at if there's any more than tap water, and typically there are. But I don't, to your question of like how long it takes microplastics to degrade and end up in the environment, I don't necessarily know if there's a study out there that's looked at that. Not long, I would imagine.
You've spoken about single-use plastics. Are the same toxins found in other plastics like mixing bowls, children's toys, so forth?
Yeah, they are. That's a good question. I know there was, I think it passed. I need to go back and look to get PFAS. Are y'all aware of PFAS, forever chemicals? It's a whole class of chemicals, yes, okay. To get PFAS out of children's toys and baby bottles, and I think that has passed. But, there's a whole slew of other things that might include PFAS, including mixing bowls and things like that.
So would they replace the PFAS with something else?
So that's been known to happen. Do y'all remember BPA water bottles? Yeah, so what happens oftentimes is there is a regulation change and they decide you can no longer have BPA water bottles. Well, the chemical companies kind of foresaw that happening and they changed the chemical barely to where it's almost the same thing as BPA, but it's not. And it can have just as toxic effects. So very good question. It's something to keep our eye on. That's a whole nother conversation, is how do we regulate chemicals, because we're not doing it enough. In the US, basically a chemical is innocent until proven guilty. In Europe, it's guilty until proven innocent, and we should probably adopt that model instead.
Yeah, just a couple of things that we've been working on with plastic-free WNC. One is, if you go to a Publix grocery store, they've got big signs saying, bring your reusable, carry your own bag in. We need to get other grocery stores and big box stores doing the same thing. So if you're visiting one of those stores, ask the store manager to do that, to remind people to do it. Because a lot of people have them in the back of their car, they just forget to bring them in, kind of thing. So that's one thing we can be doing. One of the other things we're working on is we're trying to see if we can get Governor Stein to phase out the use of single-use plastics in state facilities. And hopefully that might even go down to universities, which are state facilities as well. So we're still trying to find some ways to fight this, even though our biggest tool, which is banning plastic bags, and has gone away. But there are a number of states now that have already done it, a number of municipalities that have done that. And by charging a 10-cent fee, they found that the number of paper bags went down 50% because people were motivated by a 10-cent fee to bring their own bags.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. He makes a good point. So we're still fighting at the state level, trying to get Governor Stein to issue that executive action. And he in the past has been really sensitive and supportive of the plastic issue. So we hope for success there.
At the beginning of your talk, you talked about all the other plastics. So not single-use plastic bags, but it seems like a huge amount of plastics go into all of our packaging that we buy stuff in now. And it's switched in the past, 20 years from paper or glass to plastic. And everything I buy at the grocery store now almost comes in plastic. So what's the strategy? You mentioned the strategy that we would go the way of the tobacco strategy about health, that's where we would push it, because the oil industries are making plastics cheaper. So my conclusion is that people that have to package their product are now switching to all plastic. So I get really angry that I have no choice but to purchase something in plastic.
Yeah, phenomenal point. And we were having this conversation yesterday. It's hard. It's a hard fight to pick, I think. Number one, yes, I equate it very often to the tobacco fight that lasted decades. The tobacco industry lied to the American public for decades about the health impacts of smoking. They, kind of like stalled any progress in terms of health regulations on cigarettes for decades. And the oil and gas industry is doing the same with plastics. They, kind of have created the onus of waste and disposal of plastics on us as consumers. We never asked for that. We never asked for our stuff to be packaged in all plastic. Not only that, we're taxed to get rid of it. Like our Buncombe County tax dollars go to the landfill. So not only are we having the responsibility of dealing with their waste that we never asked for, but we're paying for it too. It's a really good analogy.
I work really diligently on our recyclables, and have to pull things out that my husband puts in, and but it's a constant struggle. But hearing that such a small percentage is recycled. Now, you mentioned in those, in that triangle with the arrows, we should only put in number 1 and 2?
Sometimes 5.
How do I know sometimes on 5?
You can put 5 here locally. It really depends on where you are. So here, if you're Buncombe County, City of Asheville, you can put 5 in. It's depressing, yeah, when you realize how many products are not 1, 2, or 5
So those should just go in the regular waste cans?
in the trash.
Wow. And so, and plastic bottles, you know, for water?
Those should be a 1, I
Okay.
think, and so they would go in the recycling.
And a lot of, because I look at everything, some of them have no numbers.
Trash.
Wow. And only, so if I do that diligently, what percentage of my waste will be recycled?
0.00. So the reason for that is because when you recycle plastic, you can only have resins of the same kind. So it has to be like all 1s in a bin can be recycled together. All 2s are in a separate bin and can be recycled together. You cannot intermingle the 2. Otherwise, the whole feedstock is contaminated, and then they can't sell it. There's no end market for that recycled material.
So you're saying I should separate 1s and 2s? Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
You don't have to do that at home in your own, you have a blue bin?
yes.
Yeah, you don't have to do that. But what I'm talking about is like what Kirby does. They have
Okay.
to, sort it all into its own types so that they can send it off to the different places that actually do the recycling breakdown.
Okay, and also at grocery stores, I bring back my plastic bags. I don't use them, but somehow in some places, and my husband, they get used. What percentage of that gets recycled at the grocery stores?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did a study about a year ago where we took big chunks of plastic bags and we glued in an Apple tracker device, and we dropped them off at different stores. They all have the containers in the front of the stores. So we did several at Ingles's, Walmart's, Target's, I think Food Lion. And what we found is that Ingalls actually does end up at a recycling facility. So that's great. Some of the other ones ended up like in the middle of the ocean, or one was the last I checked was on a container like in Laos somewhere. So I would say, I don't know, I don't have a number to give you, but it's not 100%.
Okay, it's just discouraging all that effort for naught.
It is, yeah.
I just want to add, and then I'll give it to someone else, but Hopi's does not have any plastic bags. You have to bring your own bags there. So that's a local company that is agreeing to do that. And the other thing is it's a paid service called Compost Now, but they now have something where you can pay for a giant bag and you can recycle things like the clamshells and other numbers that aren't taken by Kirby. So if you have a lot of those, I usually invite my neighbors to bring theirs over to me and then recycle it. So at least it's not getting put in a landfill, hopefully. So those are a couple of other things. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. For years and years, I have recycled. I always recycle, almost always. In the past few years, I've realized it is not cost effective. I haven't proved it. It's a gut feeling. It's not cost effective. And my final comment is a question. What about all the water we're pouring down our own drain and paying for, both coming into the house and going down into wherever water goes? What about the balance? Because now we're hearing 2% of what we put in the recycle actually gets recycled. So from this talk, which has been excellent, it does sound like the best route is the medical one, that maybe, I don't know what the percentages of success with cigarettes was, but we're all aware of that it happened big time.
Yeah, so to clarify, 2% of the time an item is effectively recycled. So a bottle turns into a bottle. The other times it's still recycled, it just reaches a form where it can't be recycled again. So yes, I would say it's part of the solution. It is not what we should be hanging our hat on, and that's what the oil and gas industry has been marketing for years. They have wanted us to think that we could recycle our way out of this, and that is not what's happening. So we need to take pressure off recycling. It's not our silver bullet. We should still do it when and where we can. You're right. Is it financially effective? I don't know. I know recycled plastic is more expensive than virgin plastic. And it's going to stay that way as long as oil and gas is in the plastic business. So this is a complicated issue that is going to require several avenues to make real changes on.
Probably many of us in this room have lived in other countries, including my family, and it can be done. Other countries are not as wasteful as we are. I'm ashamed of my country in that one aspect. Well, there's 2 or 3 aspects, but. And also I went grocery shopping in Venice, and all I had was my suitcase, so I didn't know I was going to be in the grocery store, and I had to pay for paper bags to schlep them home.
You're right. I find hope. I think there are 8 countries in Africa that have banned single-use plastics. And we kind of pride ourselves on being this rich, developed nation. Well, these 8 countries in Africa have figured it out. And, they're on a much better path than we are at this point. So it can be done. We just have a lot of people with a lot of power standing in our way right now. And the way to change that is with the masses, I think, so.
So I've read that we are consuming a lot of microplastics if we eat seafood. Aldi's charges for bags, and no one complains. Trader Joe, before COVID, used to give me a raffle ticket, and if I brought my own bags in, and then I would put it in, and I won twice, a $25 gift card. They stopped it when COVID started, so you might be able to start with Trader Joe's and get them to redo that. I would even, if I got up to the store, because I know Publix and they have those things, but by the time I walk all the way up, the honest truth is I don't go all the way back to my car to get my bags. But with Trader Joe's, with my little raffle, I did. Of course, they have a smaller parking lot also, but I would walk back and get my bag to be able to be in the raffle.
Yeah, there's a lot of social science literature around that, and we studied a bit about that when we were framing the ordinance that we were kind of shopping to Buncombe County and City of Asheville. And people respond to both carrots and sticks. Like your ticket thing was a carrot. We saw a lot of response when there's a stick too. So the particular ordinance that we were pushing with the county and the city was a ban on plastic bags with a fee on paper. So there was, a charge. That charge on paper was to discourage people from using it. It was to encourage them to bring their own bags in. But one thing I want to kind of iterate is, grocery store bags are one part of this puzzle. We started there as plastic-free WNC because there was a lot of precedent for it across the country. There were 8 states in the U.S. have passed bans on plastic bags, and 500 municipalities. So we had a lot we could work with in terms of trying to learn what worked and how it worked and what didn't work and what we could implement here locally. But grocery stores aren't the enemy here. It's really the oil and gas industry and the plastic production facilities. So yes, we want to make changes where we can, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's really like a step above even the grocery stores. It's the actual manufacturing process.
Me. those recycling outfits, I assume they're a for-profit initiative, and they make their money by selling the plastic as for resins to use. Well, with the price of all the virgin resins come down, how often are these recycling businesses literally going to go out of business because there will be no buyers for their products? Have you seen that? And when do you, as a functioning pessimist, when do you expect the local one to shut down because of that very reason?
Oh, I hope not. That is a pessimistic idea. What I will say, I don't know the numbers, but what I have seen some places is where they just decide not to take plastics, period. They'll take glass, aluminum, cardboard, but they won't accept plastics. So I could see that happening. I don't foresee it happening anytime soon, but yeah, it might come to that.
Yeah, Anna, so way back when I lived near the ocean and microplastics, as I recall, it was kind of introduced as an ocean and ocean food system problem, made me wonder whether us that are fortunate to live in the mountains now, whether it's a real case to be made for those that we're talking to, that we have kind of a special responsibility, that our stuff goes down, downhill, downstream. Water and gravity have their role to play in the, creation of microplastics. Can we say to our friends and neighbors, hey, we that live in the mountains have an increased responsibility?
I love that idea. Here's what the science is showing. The nature of microplastics are so transportable by wind and atmospheric pressure that they've seen microplastics kind of like convey halfway across the country. So like, even though, yes, we are producing microplastics in our waterways that will end up in the ocean, it's also in the air that we breathe and in the wind. And so and there's even studies showing that can interact with weather patterns. So like, it's yes, but also there's more to it than just the river side of things too.
So I'm going to use my prerogative because I have the mic. Switching gears for a moment to the health side of this, you talked about the pervasiveness of these microplastics within our bodies. Are there any kind of filtration systems that are out there or that are being researched to remove them from water before it's consumed, or to remove it from other products before they go into the production cycle?
Great question. So a couple things to talk to that point. There is no microplastic standard for drinking water. By that I mean that no water authority has a threshold for microplastics from drinking water from your tap. And even if they did, it would still get contaminated because I imagine a lot of our pipes are PVC pipes. And so there would still be contamination that way. In terms of filters, filters for what? Getting it out of the water.
So either for water, also just in the production process of the foods we eat. So if I'm making a bottle of ketchup or making baby formula or something like that, are there any industry standards for safety? I think of a baby consuming these for their entire life, and that doesn't sound great.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So, so from the drinking water perspective, no standards. We're starting to see some conversations happening from wastewater treatment perspectives, so they can filter water out in their discharge before it hits whatever receiving water body it sends its water to. That doesn't necessarily affect you if you're not drinking from that water source, but it would be a piece of the puzzle. In terms of protecting ourselves, baby formula, and other ways about protecting us from ingesting microplastics, the best thing you can do is just avoid using microplastics around your food and your drink. I know a lot of moms have resorted to a lot of parents have resorted to glass bottles and that kind of a thing. But to be honest, there's no way you can totally barricade yourself from microplastics. You will ingest it. It's in everything we eat, seafood especially, but every food. It's in everything we drink. We inhale it in the air, so there's no real running away from it. But you know, that is particularly why we need production to come down.
So I lived in a rural district in California where going to the dump was a monthly thing. And before going, I would separate 1s, 2s, 3 through 8s, colored bottles versus regular bottles, you know, that were clear. And I would get money back for the amount of glass that I did. So our local company that picks up trash and recycling, there's one recycling that all 1s through 8s all go into. I'm wondering what happens to those when they get to the dump and recycling center. The separation, the time, the manpower to do what individual citizens were doing. Yeah, can you speak to that and how that could be changed in a positive way?
Yeah, so, you know, we all love the blue bins, right? You just throw your recycling into it and don't think about it again until it's trash day. You got to take it to the street. But you raise a really good point. The fact that it is not sorted is really complicated for our recycling facilities. It adds a huge layer to what they have to do. There was a time, like you mentioned, in rural California, and I grew up in Tennessee, we also had to sort all of our recyclables in different color bottles, papers, etc. Everything was sorted. The shift to the big blue bins happened. The oil and gas industry actually heavily lobbied local federal governments to do the single stream. And that's because, you know, they kind of framed it as a way to ease it on us as residents, consumers, like, oh, now we don't have to think about what color this thing is or what this item is made out of. They can just throw everything in the same bin. Yes, it's easier, but it's a lot harder for the recycling process. And because of that, less stuff gets recycled, and less stuff, there's more contamination when things do end up in the recycling facility, which makes a lesser product. So then there's less of a market for that kind of a stuff. So yes, it should go back to the way it was. I don't see a lot of places doing that, but maybe there's a way for that here eventually.
I went on a tour of Kirby before COVID, and they told us that they had nowhere to recycle glass. They had to pay someone to come in and take the glass away. In the last place I lived, you could only recycle clear glass. You had to throw away in your regular trash all the colored glass because the recycling center didn't deal with it. So, like you said, each recycling place does different things. But I actually called Kirby about 2 weeks ago because I eat mostly plant-based, so I have a tremendous amount of clamshells and we eat a lot of berries. And none of that is recyclable here. She said jugs, bottles, and then number 5 is yogurt and sour cream containers, and that's it. All that other stuff you're throwing in there, they're not recycling it. And also, my husband tends to throw little teeny pieces of note paper in there. If you saw how they're going like this, separating it, I can assure you those little pieces of paper are ending up on the floor. So I've stopped throwing those little teeny things into my recycling, you know, a big sheet of paper or whatever, paper, you know, from a cracker box or something, I'll throw in there a bit. But I'm really thoughtful about what that poor guy has to do. I am very careful about plastic bags and recycling because when they put that through there, if a plastic bag gets caught in the machinery, it shuts down the entire place. They have to turn it off and clean it out, and it's a really, really big deal.
Yeah, Kirby tour is awesome. If you get a chance to go, I have done it a few times, and it kind of blows my mind every time I go.
Hi, we have some questions online. Would you mind if I read some aloud?
Sure.
All right, so our first one is, does plastic leach from our PVC pipes?
Yes.
All right. And then what happens to the bags we recycle at the grocery store?
Yeah, so they do sometimes end up at recycling facilities. I can't say every time that happens. I imagine sometimes they end up in the landfill. But honestly, that is the best way to get rid of your plastic shopping bags, besides just throwing them in the trash, because Kirby cannot take them. If you do have plastic shopping bags, that's where you should drop them off.
All right. Another question. Any thoughts about corn-based plastics that are biodegradable? Some restaurants use containers and straws made of corn.
Yeah, there's a whole world of alternative materials out there. I didn't touch on it today. I'm always curious, like I think that will be a piece of the puzzle in terms of tackling plastic pollution. Oftentimes these alternative materials, corn-based, or they're called bioplastics, they still have toxic chemicals in them. So you need to be careful about, just because it says a bioplastic doesn't mean it's good for you. It doesn't mean it's readily compostable or things like that. So there is potential there, but most of what I've seen from that world has been hasn't been the answer to me. That being said, there's a whole world of organic materials that can be alternatives. We've seen a lot of headway in hemp materials, as well as, we used to wear cotton everything, and now I don't know if I have a cotton thing at all in my closet. So most of I didn't touch on this, I should have. Most of our clothing is made from plastic, nylon, polyester, all of that's plastic stuff, and it readily sheds. So these shed microfibers, all day, every day. So going back to organic materials, I think is another really good way to, curb our reliance on plastics.
Okay, and then a couple more. So the question is, if you Google what plastics are recyclable in Buncombe County, it says numbers 1 through 7. However, you're saying only 1, 2, and 5. So they wondered, why is the website saying that if it isn't true?
Yeah, this has always been a tricky communications thing. I think the 1, 2, and 5 is the newest language that they want us to use, and it's honestly, I wouldn't even think about the numbers. From what Nancy Lawson, what Kirby has told me, is they want bottles, jugs, and tubs. So think about it that way. Those typically line up with the numbers I said earlier, the 1, 2s, and 5s. But if you have 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, it should go in the trash.
Okay, and then one more for now. Are biodegradable tea bags okay, or do they also contain plastic?
Oh, tea. I should have put a slide up about this. I can't speak to every type of tea bag, but studies have shown tea bags release kind of an insane amount of microplastics in each cup of tea. So think about, what your tea bags are in. I know, you're looking at me like I did. It's me, I'm sorry. So they do release microplastics into the environment. I will say microplastics are released kind of at an accelerated rate anytime there's heat involved, anytime there's fat involved. Those two things kind of accelerate the whole process. So tea especially is known to have microplastics in it. Oh, thanks, Susan.
Are we talking about the tea itself or the paper cover? The paper is of
Oftentimes it's not paper. Oftentimes it's a plastic. There's plastic in that bag.
No kidding. Feels like
tea balls, little things.
I'm surprised. I thought it was paper.
I did too. I'm a big tea drinker. I thought it was paper for a long time. And there may be companies out there that have shifted the bag material. I don't know them off the top of my head, but it's worth looking into.
One more question.
Probably everybody's aware of that container upstairs where you can bring your plastic bags. I assume those are going to a company that makes decking material. Are y'all aware of that?
Trex, I think.
Yes.
Typically where, yeah.
So anyway, that's available to put plastic bags. I don't think they take like little plastic containers, but they do bags.
Are there any more questions online? Because it looks like we are out of questions here, and we don't want to take up too much of your valuable time, Anna. So I want to take this time to thank you so much. I have learned an incredible amount. And I know we OLLI people are real strong activists, and we'll pass the word along as well and do our best to reduce all these single-use plastics and spread the word about plastics in general. So thank you so much. And don't forget to come next week when we have a talk from Health and Education Sciences. So thank you.
Bigelow tea bags are paper. Ooh, which one? Bigelow. Bigelow. Everybody buy Bigelow tea.